Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of R-Rated, where today we're looking at the 5th episode of Hawkeye, Ronin. This one is pretty solid and does a good amount of work of bringing all the kind of disparate threads of this show together. It is the second to last episode of the season, probably the series, I would assume. It's up in the air, I guess, whether they're going to do like a season 2, presumably with Kate kind of taking on the mantle, or if they'll, keep Kate, around until a new movie comes out or something. But generally speaking, all of these shows kind of drop their biggest, like, what in the second to last episode, and this one is no exception. After the previous episode, we learned that Yelena is now part of the formula to this show. She has arrived after the stinger from Black Widow and is now here to fight and kill Clint Barton. But before we get into the action for that, we actually get to see a really, really good sequence dealing with what happened to her kind of in the meantime between Black Widow and Hawkeye. And the answer is not a whole lot. Because as she is on her crusade to go and rescue the widows that have all been, scattered around the world and need saving, and not so much saving as much as like freeing from the control of, the drugs that they've been given, essentially. Yelena goes into the bathroom and we watch her just kind of, it's a really cool effect. It's the first time we've actually seen, the snap from anyone's perspective, being able to actually see what that was as an experience. And it's very interesting because you watch the elements around her shift too, and it kind of like, oh, okay, so she gets snapped. Here's what that was like. And she comes out, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, the woman, Anna, that she was speaking to now has a husband and a child. And she's like, 5 years have just happened to me. They've just gone past. So I need to like take a breather here for a sec. Really well done scene. So like we had seen with Monica Rambeau in WandaVision, what the experience of coming back was like, but we didn't really see what disappearing was like at the same time. We've seen the two parts of it, but not what the experience is like for those people. We've seen people vanish, and then we've seen Monica come back, and that's it. But we haven't seen Monica vanish. We didn't see anybody else come back. Yelena's the first one we get to see both sides of that. And obviously, very tragically, so she doesn't know this, but so she gets snapped back, and like the first thing she talks about with Anna is like, I need to find my sister and let her know I'm okay. And, Natasha, literally minutes before this, was back in time by 9 years and died on Vormir. So it's like this extra little jab that everything seemed very normal for Yelena. She had started kind of making connections with her family again, and then suddenly it's gone, and Natasha's gone for good, and she's furious. And she has been hired as a Black Widow assassin to kill Hawkeye, with the added benefit of, as far as she is aware, Natasha is dead because of Clint, which is like 40% true. But it's a little more complicated than that. But it's the trouble of Clint can, insist that he didn't do it, which he didn't do it. But at the end of the day, there's no way to prove any of the stuff that happened there, because the only people who were there for it were Clint and Natasha and Red Skull. So, yeah. But the scene was really good. We actually get to follow up with Yelena as she meets up with Kate back at her old apartment after it's been burned and hollowed out and stuff. Kate's there to grab some of her things, and this is at least the second best scene in the entire show. I still think that Clint talking to Nate might be slightly more potent, but this one definitely adds a lot of tension to the mix, because it's kind of an interesting reflection on when Clint and Natasha first met. It was like he was on a mission to kill her specifically, and like there was a lot of animosity there, and he made a snap decision to pull her out instead, and they became super close friends. Here we have Yelena, who's on a mission to kill Clint, and Kate, who's kind of becoming his protege, and they're having a very similar opposite sides kind of, first interaction together. And in the middle of the scene, I'm just like, oh man, are Yelena and Kate going to become like super, super BFFs after this? That sounds pretty cool. I'd be down for that. And at first it's very dry, but there's like, it's a dry humor that kind of pervades the scene between like the macaroni bit, like, I made some macaroni. You are not hungry? No? And then they do eat, and after they've eaten for a bit, they start asking questions of each other, and essentially it becomes very clear that Yelena is here to kill Clint. She will not be dissuaded from this, and that, at least as far as she knows, Clint killed Natasha. Whereas Kate is very insistent on the fact that that's not what happened, that Clint would never do that. But Yelena kind of essentially asks her, like, can you prove that? Like, and she's like, well, no, I guess. She very casually like dives out of the window. It's weird. It's the one moment of the show that reminds me of like CW style shows where it's like, oh, it's a big warehouse style studio apartment set where someone jumps out the window because, I don't know, it's an exit from the scene. But like, it looked good. Like, it didn't look cheap at all. I think they did fine with it. But yeah, it's maybe one of the best scenes in the entire show. Again, it's at least comparable to Clint's phone call. There's a couple interesting like bits in there too. Like, they make mention of a new and improved Statue of Liberty, which is the downside of these shows being written in, like, the shows and movies being written in advance and then not having a chance to bounce off of public perception and reception of stuff, because I believe that's supposed to be a call forward to Spider-Man No Way Home, where in the trailer, there's at least one spot where the Statue of Liberty appears to be equipped with a giant Captain America shield, essentially, which is very cheesy and odd. It's one of those things where it's like, I get why they're doing it. It makes it feel more like the comic books in its own way, but like, the Statue of Liberty is among those things around the world, probably the number one thing in the United States, where we wouldn't basically touch it for any reason. And it's odd to, and like, I get that, like, this is in a world where the universe had been all mangled and fucked up, and Captain America with Tony Stark and everybody else saved the universe, essentially. So like, yeah, strange times call for strange measures, I guess. But it's just like, it's such a bizarre visual. But anyway, Yelena, I think, makes mention of the fact that it's a new and improved, quote unquote, Statue of Liberty, which is a nice call forward to the new Spider-Man movie, which, like, the London premiere had already the premiere had already happened. It had already come out in the UK, and it was coming out in the United States like 24 hours later. I guess more like 30 hours later. So like, it's a nice reference to the movie that's actively coming out at the same time. And there's an interesting bit here where Kate argues essentially that Clint would never do that. He's still an Avenger is her line here, and Yelena responds with like, what does that word even mean? Like, you can say like, oh, they're an Avenger, but what does that ultimately mean, and what does it matter? Like, Tony Stark was an Avenger, but he helped set up the Sokovia Accords that really hamstrung the Avengers and superheroes in general. And the Hulk was an Avenger, but he fucked up a bunch of Johannesburg. I've never been clear on how it's pronounced. So like, it's not like, and honestly, to Yelena's credit, Hawkeye was an Avenger when he decided to become Ronin and start pretty brutally murdering people, criminals, but still murdering people. So like, it's an interesting kind of back and forth, and like, this whole show kind of revolves around the aftermath and kind of taking responsibility for that dark turn, even if it was temporary, even if it was, him facing off against criminals, it's still him doing some pretty nasty stuff. and it's sort of him coming to grips with it. He has a call with his wife at one point where he kind of apologizes and is like, this thing keeps getting bigger and bigger, and essentially explains like everything that's going on, that like he got Kate involved when he shouldn't have, and now she's wrapped up in it, and they have a list with, you know, the Bartons like family names and info, even though everyone's been so careful. And there's just all this stuff going on, and she, not coldly, like she's still very supportive and is like, you know, we're going to do this as a team, but you can tell that like the stress of this has gotten to her a bit, where she kind of tells him, is like, well, you didn't call to ask my permission, and it's not really mine to give here anyway. And like, just do what you have to do and do it right and come home. Like, that's kind of, you know, the stance that she's got with this. And it's kind of this, I don't know what word really fits for it, but it's essentially the acknowledgement that like, yeah, you kind of brought this on yourself, and now you do have to deal with this. Like, this has to be dealt with now. And so we wind up with an altercation between him, dressed in his Ronin gear, and Maya. In the lead up to this, we get a quick little scene with some of the tracksuit guys, and they're in the car talking about stuff in general, and they mention that like one of them is like, yeah, you know, we're really cool, like, and they said like a band, and then another band is like Royal Tenenbaums, and the driver's like, you think we look like Royal Tenenbaums? And he looks down at himself and the other one, and they're both wearing tracksuits, and he's like, yeah. It's like, yes, that's probably, I wouldn't say most iconic. Everyone kind of has an iconic look in that movie, but Ben Stiller's character and his sons, I think, most prominently have matching tracksuits, red and white tracksuits in that movie. So I think that's kind of a cute little reference for Wes Anderson fans out there. But yeah, so Clint faces off with Maya. They have their fight. You can tell based off of like the choreography, which is a sign of like really well directed choreography, or well choreographed fight scene, I guess is maybe more accurate. There were a lot of points where if he was going full Ronin, he could have absolutely killed Maya, like no question about it. But he's pulling his punches. He's actively using the backside of his retractable sword. He's going for moves to disable or to just kind of stun or knock her out, basically, as opposed to kill shots. It does ultimately get her on the ground and have his sword pointed at her. He takes off the hood to reveal to her his identity, so that that she knows, and that he's kind of like, you know, he's trying to like make this thing final at this point. Essentially, like, I am Ronin. I'm the person you're looking for, and I know that you're digging up information on me, and you know that I'm Ronin now. So if you come after my family or me, it's gonna be the last thing that you ever do. Like this very blunt, like, you're coming after Ronin because you think he's dangerous. Yeah, I am. And if you fuck with me, you're gonna die. So I think there's kind of two parts to this. One, he definitely wants to get them off his back and just deal with this for good. But also, I think he's trying to... So in the previous episode, he talked with Kazi, who we learn in this episode might actually be a mole working for Maya's boss. We find out that the boss is getting increasingly annoyed, or at least Clint seems pretty sure that he's getting pretty annoyed. And the longer this goes on, the more likely it is that he's going to come out to play. And I don't think Clint wants that either. Like, I think he wants that sleeping dragon to stay sleeping, essentially. That we find out by the end of the episode, through full-ass confirmation that, yeah, it is the Kingpin. He is in play, and he has been the entire time, as it turns out. So at the end of Yelena and Kate's conversation, Kate basically presses on the fact that Yelena's been hired but doesn't know who hired her. Yelena does some digging and finds out that she was hired by Eleanor, who is working for the Kingpin in at least some capacity, which means that Eleanor and Maya are both working for the same guy. This was kind of huge. We also see Kingpin, who the screen grab that was on the phone that we get for that looks like nothing like Vincent D'Onofrio. It was a very strange choice of photo. It also looks like a guy in a suit that does not fit him at all. Like the suit is humongous on him. But according to the credits, Vincent D'Onofrio is here, which means that the weird when he did the little cheek thing in an earlier episode was actually him also. But yeah, he is back. Very intrigued to see how this is going to go. He's wearing a white suit, which makes me wonder if this is going to be a continuation of Daredevil or not. I'm still holding fast to my hope that the watch belongs to Matt Murdock and that he's essentially been undercover for years, I guess. Because, like, that's the thing, too, is the old Netflix shows took place basically when they came out, which was almost a decade ago at this point. So, and the Defenders was like, what, 2014, 2015, somewhere around there? And the aftermath of that going into season 3, Daredevil goes underground, essentially. So, like, is he just been, like, doing weird just underground shit for, like, 7 years now? Maybe he got snapped also, and it's been more like 2. But, so we have kind of a bunch of our pieces in play, and I'm also wondering, like, oh, no, is part of this twist going to involve essentially that, like, well, no, because, so, oh, this is so confusing. So Eleanor is pictured with Kingpin, but Jack, who runs Sloan, means that Kazi is an employee of his, but Kazi was a mole for Kingpin to get Maya's dad killed. So is Jack also in all this? And, like, Jack and Eleanor are actually secretly in cahoots? Are the Duquesnes a target of Kingpin? Or worst option, are they going to try to make it out that Jack is actually a decent guy in the end, and just our perspective through Kate and Eleanor, and just kind of his awkward mannerisms and things are what made him out to look like a bad guy? And he actually, because, like, if you look back at his scenes, you could certainly see how they will try to twist it where it's like, well, he's always been kind of charming and affable, even when he's been sort of weird. And, like, yes, he lied about being a really good swordsman, and, like, all of these, and, like, when Clint was there, he was generally just, like, having cheerful conversation, whereas Eleanor was a lot more direct and blunt about things. And did she hire Yelena to kill Clint so that Kate would see that Clint is mortal and would get her away from all of this stuff? Like, I don't know. There's so many things going on here. There's all of the strings have suddenly tied together, but, like, just a bunch of stuff just went flying into the air. So I have no idea where any of this is going. It's a really good cliffhanger into the final episode for next week. Yeah. I don't know. This has been kind of a weird sort of review. I just kind of, like, the biggest moments are so big that it's hard to really, like, get around those. I would say that I'm going to give this episode an 8. I almost want to give it a 9. I don't think it's quite good enough to be a 9 because there's more shocking moments than there are, like, really well crafted ones. The scene with Yelena and Kate, that is kind of the centerpiece of the episode, is definitely, like, one of the show's best. The confrontation between Ronin and Maya is also way up there as well. And, like, the point of it too, he's also kind of trying to show Maya the dangers of going down that particular path of just vengeance, and, like, essentially proving or trying to prove to her is, like, the path you're on is the path that turned me into this. So unless you want to be this person too, you got to stop. But I'm very curious. I'm hoping we get some Matt Murdock in the end. It'd be very, very cool if the last episode ended with the watch being handed back over to Matt, and now he's in play for stuff too. It definitely makes sense now why this is all being set in New York, obviously, too. With, that's Kingpin's stomping ground. He really doesn't have any interest outside New York, so it's a great way to, like, rope him back into things. I don't know. It'd be very, very cool if the Heroes for Hire in general, in any capacity, wind up showing up here. I don't know. There's also I need to take a look again at the watch in that scene in the trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home. I guess I'll see it tonight. But like, there's a shot that people thought was Charlie Cox because it was hands on a table that looked a lot like his hands, his arm with a watch on. That was similar to the one that he's got. But I had mentioned that to CJ, and CJ's like, "Why would Daredevil wear a watch?" I'm like, huh. And not in the sense of like, oh well, he's blind, he can't see it, but he'd be able to, like, using his seeing powers, he'd be able to figure it out, I'm pretty sure. But more importantly, he'd be hearing that ticking all day long, and that would probably drive him fucking crazy. So I could see why maybe he wouldn't. But I thought he did wear a watch in his show, but I don't know. Anyway, I really like this episode. I'm very much looking forward to the finale next week. Oh, one last thing on my way out. The closing credits got one more update where, so usually they end on this animated shot of Clint and Kate looking at each other from two separate buildings, as it kind of like pulls back. This time, that entire scene, you'll also see this like white border to it come in, and you see that this is all the silhouette of Kingpin just dominating the frame. And it's like, oh, that's so good. So good. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. I hope you guys are too. I would love to hear what you think about this episode of Hawkeye, as well as this review for it. Feel free to drop a comment down below. Feel free to like or subscribe if you like this video and you want to see more. And I'll be looking forward to coming back next time to close out not just Hawkeye, but also 2021 in the MCU. It's a fly. Hello. Thank you guys for hanging out, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.